Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe Warren. My faculty mentor is Dr. Annie Ditta, and my project is motivation across the COVID-19 pandemic. So as we all know, the online education experience during COVID has been a trying time for us all, especially for students. And prior research has shown that there have been decreases in motivation, engagement, and perceptions of success, and as well as increases in stress. So for this, and all these prior studies also use retrospective reports. And for this study, however, we hope to investigate the online learning experience during COVID by obtaining a true early pandemic measure and then to allow for a direct comparison. And we hope to specifically investigate whether motivation has declined across the pandemic, what factors might be underlying this decline, and whether student learning outcomes like GPA have been affected. So for this study, we were able to obtain an early pandemic measure done by another faculty member at UCR. So we took this original survey, which was sent out originally in March of 2020, adapted it and added some new questions, and then sent it out again to UC Riverside undergraduate students. And the survey asked questions about social connectivity, motivation, loneliness and isolation, and student learning outcomes. And some example questions are for motivation. Students rated how much they agreed with statements like, I am a hard worker, I have so much in life to be thankful for, I'm ready to learn in class. And then for loneliness and isolation, some example questions were how much students agreed with statements like, I lack companionship, I feel left out. And then for social connectivity, questions like, I feel connected with my classmates, I speak regularly with my professors, things like that. And then for student learning outcomes, students were asked to give a self-report of GPA. And they were also asked to respond to statements like, I'm doing well overall academically, and my grades have stayed relatively the same before and during the pandemic. So we hypothesized that overall students would report lower levels of motivation and lower levels of all subscales of motivation, which are grit, gratitude, and purpose later in the pandemic. And we also hypothesized that students later in the pandemic would report higher levels of loneliness and isolation compared to their early pandemic group. And we also said that there would be a negative correlation between motivation and loneliness, and positive correlations between motivation and sense of connection, motivation and self-perceived success, and motivation and GPAs. So we found overall that motivation did, students late in the pandemic did report decreased levels of motivation in the late pandemic group. And we found that while students reported lower levels of grit and purpose, they did not report a significant difference in gratitude. And we also found that students later in the pandemic reported higher levels of loneliness and isolation compared to the early pandemic peers. And on these graphs, the blue is early pandemic and the late is green, and the asterisks indicate significance. And then we also found in our correlational results that there was a negative relationship between motivation and loneliness, meaning that as students reported lower levels of motivation, they were reporting a higher level of loneliness. Are also reporting, it's not a causal relationship. And then we also found that students who reported low motivation were also reporting a low sense of connection to instructors and peers and instruction materials. And we also found that students who reported high levels of motivation were also reporting higher levels of self-perceived academic success. However, we did not find a significant relationship between higher motivation and higher GPAs. So in summary, students are less motivated at the end of the pandemic compared to the beginning. Student gratitude may not have been impacted by the pandemic. There's a negative relationship between loneliness and isolation. And there's a positive relationship between motivation and sense of connectedness. And that low motivation may not be related to changes in student learning outcomes. So in the future, we would like to send the study out again to collect a possible after pandemic measure to investigate whether there are long-term decreases or increases in motivation due to remote education. Any questions? Yes.
I'm sorry, could you explain one more time the way that you performed this comparison between reports of early pandemic versus late pandemic? Was that data from the early pandemic done at the time of early pandemic?
Yes, yes. So the prior studies used retrospective reports, that meaning that students were asked within one survey to report how they were feeling earlier in the pandemic, which at that point was probably months behind in time. And then they were also asked, how are you feeling right now? Like in rating responses like that. So for our study, we wanted to overcome that limitation by getting a true early pandemic measure. And we were able to do this. We found a survey done by a UCR faculty member that was sent out in March of 2020. So we were able to count this as our early pandemic measure, and we just adapted that original survey and sent it out again to get our late pandemic measure so we could like directly compare. Yes.
Why do you think there wasn't a relationship between GPA and motivation?
Well, that's a good question. So I think that like many of us have probably experienced that earlier in the pandemic, especially in like March and stuff, when the pandemic was first going on, we all experienced a lot of like leniencies in our classes. Like we had, like for me, my finals were canceled at first. And then after that, I had at-home tests and they were open notes, and professors in general were more lenient with like assignments and deadlines. And then this all sort of, some of it has continued until now. Like still people are experiencing open note online tests. So yeah. So therefore it's plausible that you can still feel not very motivated, but still be getting like a pretty good GPA anyways. Okay, yes.
So apart from what you just said, contribute like the leniency people have with professors, and that could help mitigate the reason why they could have low motivation and high. But the question I wanted to ask is, could it also be with drive? Because some people could not have a high motivation, but they could be like, okay, I still need to graduate college. So they push through, and not really having a high motivation doesn't really mean you would not try to excel in college. It just means you don't have like that driving factor to do well. So I just want to point out that not only the lenience from professors, but you have to do like students who are like, okay, I still need to graduate, so I just have to go through and graduate.
Right. So that could be also kind of like a life purpose type of thing, which we did measure. And there were like decreases in purpose also, but I still think that things like that, like I need to graduate, can be very motivating, or in some way can push you to the finish line, even when you're not feeling very motivated. Yes.
And maybe sort of related to the previous questions, was it surprising that there was no relationship between gratitude and motivation?
Yeah, so we were not predicting that, and we were surprised by it. But now, like retrospectively, I think it kind of makes sense. Like, you know, being in the pandemic and being exposed to those types of hardships, seeing other people around you getting and dying of COVID, or other people possibly in like bad home situations due to this, you may just feel grateful for, I am alive, my family is well, you know, I don't have COVID. So therefore you might just feel more grateful for like the small things. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you think you'd be able to apply the same method to populations outside of what was in this study? Like, are you aware of any other surveys done like the one done by other faculty members, but targeting, say, you know, the community college population, or I'm trying to think of more significant differences there.
No, yeah. So I am not aware. Usually the ones we've been looking at have been on college students, like undergraduate ones, but I have seen other ones with graduate students also included, and they have also found significant results. But I think this could be applicable to other age groups as well, like younger kids too, and also in like public and private other universities, like you said.